Idaho Power utilizes water running through our hydro turbines to generate power. It's one of our lowest cost forms of power generation. And so anything that we can do to enhance the amount of water that's available for hydropower generation, which in this case is cloud seeding, is something that the company looks to.
Kresta, how are you?
I am good, thank you.
It's Kresta, right?
Kresta.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
You are the director of water for Idaho Power. Is that accurate?
I'm a senior manager
Senior
for
manager.
water resources
Okay.
and merchant groups.
Okay, fantastic. You and I got connected because I've been trying to find somebody that could talk about the cloud seeding programs that Idaho Power used. And I was very fortunate enough to speak with Senator Den Hartog and mention this to her. And she said, oh, well, we actually saw a presentation from Idaho Power. Let me see if I can find somebody to talk to. And then I got connected with you. God bless America. Like, it worked. So I'm very, very curious about this. Almost every single person I've spoken with about the Idaho cloud seeding program and saying, no, this is not conspiracy. Like, there are cloud seeding programs that Idaho Power uses and other people have used for decades. And I'm going to find out about them. And every single person, with the exception of one, they're like, what? Like, what is this? And of course, you see the very popular photos of a beautiful blue sky with all these crisscrossing contrails, presumably from airplanes and stuff. And they're like, we're all getting poisoned. I'm like, look, I have no idea. Like, but Kresta's coming on. So, like, God bless it. I'll ask her. So could you just give me, we have plenty of time. Can you just explain what cloud seeding is and how Idaho Power uses it, or even why they use it? Obviously, with power generation, people don't really consider like cloud seeding. It's more for like agriculture, but this is something that you guys use to generate power, and that's why you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I will give it a shot. So cloud seeding in and of itself is really, it's augmenting the winter storms that are already coming through our territory, our area. So we're augmenting those systems, trying to just coax more precipitation out as systems pass by. And so we do it in a couple of ways. We have ground generators that we operate. So depending on the type of storm, we'll utilize that resource, or we use airplane to deliver a seeding agent. And what that seeding agent does is it basically coaxes more precipitation that already exists in the clouds as they're passing to accumulate to a particle that is put up into the clouds. And it's that accumulation that then allows that precipitation to exit the cloud as the clouds pass by, and it exits in the form of snow. So that is really in its essence what cloud seeding or weather modification or storm augmentation is doing. And so we utilized in our program a silver iodide that again is either delivered by ground generator or by aircraft, depending on the type of system that's passing.
Okay. Lots of questions, but let's start one at a time. All right. So I understand the dusty crop hopper style method of, hey, you fly through an area and you disperse a chemical. It sounds like silver iodide. How does it get distributed from the ground up? Like, I assume you don't have a gigantic fan that's just blowing the stuff north.
Yeah, so we do use a propane ground generator, and so the propane is what puts that agent up into the cloud system.
Is it like you get a combustion cycle and there's like a giant flame and it goes up? Or?
There is a flame associated
Gotcha.
with it as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so then the silver iodide gets essentially wrapped into this combustion and heat, and then that drives that up into the sky, which then disperses the silver iodide.
Correct.
Okay, great. So this is also something that it sounds like is predominantly, or is it exclusively used in the winter? Like, this is not something you do in the summer. So if there's a beautiful blue sky summer day and everything gets cloudy, is that ever is Idaho Power ever to blame for that?
No.
Okay.
Our program is specific to wintertime seeding. So there are programs outside of Idaho, outside of the United States, that are targeting different types of systems, some of it for hail suppression, some of it for enhancing rainfall, but that is not the program that we run here in Idaho. It is specific to wintertime.
Did you say suppressing rainfall?
And, I don't think I said that.
Okay.
Did I?
No, you were saying
Hail suppression.
hail suppression.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you can suppress hail using cloud seeding. Is it that you coax the moisture out before it condenses into large enough, like ice balls, or?
Oh, I am not familiar with it.
Okay, it's not something we do here.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Great. Then take me through this. Why does Idaho Power want more snow coming out of a passing winter storm? MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Yeah, great question. So Idaho Power utilizes water running through our hydro turbines to generate power. It's one of our lowest cost forms of power generation. And so anything that we can do to enhance the amount of water that's available for hydropower generation, which in this case is cloud seeding, is something that the company looks to. So that's particularly why the company has been interested in cloud seeding. And really the cloud seeding program started with the question that was posed by a shareholder back in the early 1990s in encouraging the company to investigate cloud seeding just for that very purpose.
So you get more snowpack, that melts in the spring, that drives more water down through the creeks and streams into your hydroelectric turbines.
Correct. That's exactly
Gotcha.
the hope. And so we see it as it's a long-term water management program. So we're enhancing water supply year after year. So some of that water supply we'll see come through our hydropower facilities downstream. Some of it will remain in reservoirs for irrigation use. Some of it will end up benefiting recreation, fisheries,
Sure.
water quality, and so forth. So,
Okay. So that is the biggest question that I think people have, at least that I've spoken with. They're like, okay, look, you mentioned water quality. They get really freaked out. They're like, wait. What the hell is getting shot into the clouds? Where does it go once it gets shot? Like, does it ride the raindrops down? And what is it that's entering our water? Like, does it seep into the ground? Are these, crazy heavy metals? Like, what is, it's just silver. It sounds like it's just silver iodide that you enhance the passing storms with. Like, what is silver iodide? What does it do? Where does it go? Is it something that's naturally occurring? Like all the questions.
So silver iodide is a compound, and it's a compound that has a really strong bond, and it's that bond that makes it insoluble. So it does go up into the clouds. It acts as that particle that then the precipitation adheres to and exits. And so it does come down with the snow. But once it's down onto the ground or up in the mountains, it is an insoluble compound that isn't going to break down in the environment. And so it essentially stays in the soil. But keep in mind that this is such a small amount of silver that is utilized to make this all happen, that it really is undetectable beyond what already is occurring in the background as far as silver goes. Silver in and of itself, I know, raises some concern, but we're not using silver as an element. We're using it within this compound. And so it's that compound structure that creates that inert, insoluble element that then just stays in the soil.
Gotcha. So does it stay up where the snowpack starts melting, or does it literally ride the water down?
For the most part, I believe, the majority of it will stay within the soils. So whether it, comes down with the precipitation as it runs, it will adhere to soil as it moves through the system. So
Gotcha. So if like we went to some reservoir that had water that was a product of cloud seeding and tested that water, the silver iodide would not be sitting in that water column. It will have sunk down to the soil level.
For the most part, yes. I mean, it depends on where you're sampling, but keep in mind, again, this is such a small amount that we have done silver sampling in the past associated with the program. But all of our sampling resulted in levels that were undetectable beyond what's already in the background. So, and when you're talking about sampling this type of material, silver is in almost everything, right? It's in your synthetic clothing. It's in, so even the equipment that gets used to perform such a sampling effort has to go through rigorous washing and background removal of any type of silver. So our in the end, what we found is that the silver that was detected in any samples that were taken, both with water samples, soil samples, we sampled fish, and so forth. All of that was undetectable above what was already in the background. So, and that's looking at areas that we're cloud seeding targeting and areas that are outside of the target area. And so that's kind of how we develop that background that we're measuring against.
So you guys did essentially like a control group, and you were
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, this area has never been exposed to cloud seeding. There's
Correct.
no reason for us to suspect any of the materials that we have used would have transferred over here. Let's test this soil as like the base level, and we get, I don't know, 5. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the number for the silver in the soil. You're like, okay, this virgin soil essentially has a number of 5 silver. And then you go over to the area that would theoretically, excuse me, be home to the silver that was shot into the clouds. And you're like, okay, let's test this and compare it. And that number comes out at roughly 5.
Correct.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. How much silver do you guys, like, how much silver do you use in this process on an annual basis? Is it like you lose like 5 pounds of silver, or is it like,
I don't have
like,
that number. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. And I'm just curious because if it's kind of like, okay, look, in total, we use 2 pounds of silver throughout the entire year. And like, think about how far that 2 pounds of silver gets distributed over the hundreds and hundreds of square miles. Odds of it being really damaging are very slim.
Right. Yeah. When you think about the amount that is used over an entire watershed and trying to detect that amount, we compare it to, trying to find a couple of grains of salt within a swimming pool. I mean, it is such a small amount over such an expansive area that it is virtually undetectable.
One thing that people talk about with programs like this is that the buildup over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people worry about pesticides, for instance, same thing, buildup over time. It's like, I'm not worried about, 1 year living next to a golf course. I'm worried about like 30 years living next to a golf course because of the buildup over time. Is there a concern with that, which is like you might have areas that have accumulated like 30 years worth of runoff or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In our, again, going back to our sampling, we haven't found that to be the case. Other programs outside of Idaho have also looked at such sampling and have found no ill effects associated with years of cloud seeding occurring. So we haven't seen evidence of it, not only in our program here in Idaho, but also outside of Idaho. So not that we won't continue to do our due diligence. Sure. But so far, those issues have just not proven out.
Gotcha. As far as how this program functions within the state, I mentioned just really briefly before we got rolling, there was is my understanding that there was some kind of bill that was passed a few years back that removed liability from organizations like Idaho Power that were cloud seeding. What can you explain that to me? Are you familiar with what I'm saying?
Yeah, so there was a House bill passed, I believe, in 2022 or 21. I'd have to look that up. But anyway, that that was the liability was certainly a component of it, but really the crux of that bill was to give authority to the state through the Idaho Water Resource Board to bring cloud seeding programs to different basins within Idaho that had water supply issues. So that was really the reason behind the passing of that bill. Although liability was a component of it, it certainly wasn't the primary component.
Gotcha. So the Water Resource Board says, hey, we just want you to know, state of Idaho, you can make determinations or utilize this mechanism to get more precipitation out of areas that are lacking in precipitation. And then Idaho, the government says, okay, great. Like, we will pursue these programs with these companies in these particular areas. And it was essentially that bill, it sounds like, was the Water Control Board essentially saying you're now allowed to do this. Is that what you're saying?
I would switch it a little bit in that it really gives the authority to the Water Resource Board to approve and to develop a cloud seeding program within the basins itself.
So is the government saying, hey, board, you can now determine it? So it's reversed.
Right,
Gotcha.
right. The board is acting on behalf of the state in that way.
Gotcha. So then the Water Resource Board presumably says, okay, well, like if Idaho Power has been doing this for decades, how did that bill affect the cloud seeding program with Idaho Power?
It didn't necessarily, although once that bill passed, we did go through the approval process. So keep in mind that although Idaho Power has been doing cloud seeding since the 1990s and really started in the Payette Basin, since that time, Idaho Power, in collaboration with the state through the Idaho Water Resource Board, further developed cloud seeding programs in the Wood, the Boise Basin, and the Upper Snake. And so those programs are collaborative. And so the board already being involved in those programs, I guess by just the means of that collaboration, those programs rolled into that the authorization associated with that House bill. And then the Payette Basin, which remains the company's program, was authorized through the board through the application that the company submitted.
Gotcha. So the company had already been doing it, and then they
Correct.
just once this bill passed, they just said, "Hey, we've already been doing this, but we'll go through the whole application process and proper procedures that you would like us to anyway, even though we've been doing it for decades."
Correct. And it really allows the Idaho and the Idaho Water Resource Board to look at other basins that may also have water supply issues. And they can look at those basins with the idea that cloud seeding could be one of the many tools to manage or to help resolve those water supply issues.
Gotcha. And again, going back to your original statement, so essentially it's that, like, look, me being a naive, just random consumer, I'm not like a climatologist, right? Although I did get an A in climatology when I was in college. I did take that course. Missed this piece apparently. But so essentially you're saying, look, the clouds that pass, or winter storms that pass us over, have a precipitation capacity that to some degree goes untapped, right? And not 100%, but you could have a mass storm that passes over you and only drops, let's use random numbers, like 45% of its possible precipitation. And the other 55% just blows away and, goes on to some other place. And so what the cloud seeding does, it says, okay, look, instead of only getting that 45% out of this essentially like untapped water resource in the sky, we're going to fire up this silver iodide and coax out more than that 45%. What percent increase, or like how effective is the cloud seeding? Like, is there hey, we can effectively increase the precipitation from a storm by like 50% or like 10% or 3%? Like what's the benefit that Idaho Power sees?
Yeah. So it really depends on the type of storm, how successful we may be in seeding that particular system. But over a season, we are able to increase the amount of precipitation by, an average of 10% within a target area. So if we're doing that in the target areas within those basins that we've mentioned, then that adds up over an entire winter season. And so overall, on average, we're talking about over 1 million acre feet of water that can be added to the Snake River Basin.
Holy cow, 1 million acre feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Considering the water snafu that we got into with the pump farmers, that was an argument over, I think, 75,000 acre feet or something. Am I accurate on that number?
Correct.
Okay, great. Look at that. I had a number in my head. So you guys are increasing an astronomical amount as far as things that can be utilized or numbers that we worry about. Like in general, like if we're worrying about 75,000 acre feet and you're increasing by 1,000,000 acre feet just with this cloud seeding, that's a significant impact on the agricultural capacity of the area.
Right. Yeah. That water definitely helps aid in water shortages associated with irrigation delivery. It makes our reliability for water for those purposes increase. Again, it's year over year. So if you have a low water year with very little storm activity, we may be able to increase that a bit. But it really is on average. So that's the high years and those low years combined. But yeah, it's a significant amount of water that's added to the basin over time.
Gotcha. And this is unrelated to, I mean, obviously, I don't know anything about people's concerns with chemtrails in general, but I think the idea that people get at is that there's some kind of chemical that gets nefariously shot into the atmosphere. Like summertime, you see planes go by and people are very not happy about that. And again, I don't know anything about that because I don't even know if it exists, but this is distinctly different in that you're saying, hey, look, we're in very, very high altitudes removed from population centers where we modify either from the ground up with a gigantic flame of some sort or combustion system of some sort, or we have a plane flying around in that localized area, but they're not just like flying over Boise or Meridian, like.
Correct. Yeah, we really are targeting high elevations because number one, we want to increase the amount of water supply that's going to come later in the season and not early and run off and be out of the system. So it's almost like the snowpack acts as another reservoir.
Yes.
And that's the reservoir that we're really trying to enhance. And then the other thing is we're very conscious of increasing or having any impact on flood risk. And so we have very strict suspension criteria. So targeting those highest elevations helps with that, but also adhering to that suspension criteria. And that suspension criteria relies on how much snow has accumulated, and then what are the reservoirs upstream, how much storage or space is available to capture that runoff and mitigate any kind of flood risk. And so it's those two components that go into that suspension criteria. And that criteria was developed by the company working with other federal agencies. So the NRCS is one, for an example, that helped develop that suspension criteria. So.
And when you say the company, you mean Idaho Power?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. It was like a scene from Terminator. It's like
Right.
the company. I got a little
you.
nervous. No problem. So the cloud seeding then really, in effect, you're not going to see it as far as like rainfall in your neighborhood. Like you'll see it as snowpack in mountains if you have line of sight to those mountains at all. But in effect, the cloud seeding that Idaho Power very publicly engages in, it's like, listen, I don't want 10 feet of snowpack. I want 20 feet of snowpack or whatever it might be. And even that, you can't go hog wild and just say, make it snow, like let it snow as much as you possibly can, because then there are confounding risks and factors with, okay, but what do you do once it all starts melting? Like we're going to wash away half of the valley, right? Like, so you can go overboard. So there are all these levers that you guys are pulling to get just the right amount of precipitation to enhance electrical generation, to enhance water reservoirs and storage, but also to be exceedingly careful that you don't change the makeup of the ground, of the water compared to your control groups, and that you don't overload the existing liquid water storage mechanisms.
Right. Absolutely. I think you hit many of the aspects that we focus on very well. Yep.
This is wild. This is like, I had no idea this was a thing. Like, are there resources that people, if they're concerned about, can like go to and find out more? Like, do you have, you know what you need to get? You need to get like a ring cam up on one of the high peaks that's like facing the thing, the, combustion mechanism. It's like, look, you can watch live streaming. Like this is our, cloud seeding mechanism. And like, oh, look, it turned on. Like, great. Like, so, because I think not knowing what it is and just hearing the idea of cloud seeding and weather manipulation causes an extreme amount of anxiety right out of the blocks. I remember, this is kind of embarrassing. I remember in my 20s, somebody had mentioned weather manipulation. I'm like, that's impossible. That's not a thing. And then I read an article or heard somebody talking about, I can't remember if it was an article, but I read an article that there's a program that was utilized in Vietnam to increase the precipitation to like make it harder for people to move around the jungles and like flood the Viet Cong and stuff. And I'm not asking you to make comment on that, but it has always been this like kind of war tangent or malintent tangent idea, which is like you would only want to manipulate the weather to hurt people or to do something bad or to insert some risky chemical or compound into the water source, right? And again, this is me as an ignorant consumer who knows nothing about this. But that's just like, that's because I've never sat down and talked to somebody or like seen something like this. So is there a resource that people can get more information? They're like, okay, I hear what she's saying, but I have these concerns still. Like, where would they go to find out what the levels of silver iodide are in the water versus or in the ground versus, you know, unaffected areas, or what are acceptable levels of silver iodide or things like that?
Yeah. There are a number of studies that have been done that we could certainly point people to. You know, one of the leading areas is the National Center for Atmospheric Research,
Gotcha.
NCAR, out of the University of Boulder. They've done an extensive amount of research associated with cloud seeding.
And that's the National Center for Atmospheric Research out of Boulder.
University of Colorado, Boulder.
Gotcha. Okay.
Correct. So that's a source. You know, we were involved in 2017 in the Snowy project. And that also was a Idaho Power was involved in a research project back in 2017. It was a National Science Foundation funded project called Snowy. And it was the Idaho experiment. We had multiple universities associated with it, and NCAR with the University of Boulder or University of Colorado Boulder was one of the universities associated with it. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. A lot of data. And do people just go to the NCAR like site to get access to this information or access to the study?
Yeah, there were a number of papers that came out of that study. And so starting with the University of Colorado Boulder, and NCAR would be a good place to go and find some of those papers.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other weather manipulation program run by the government or a private enterprise that would be affecting Idaho?
No, none that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Here's one question.
Let me stop right there.
Yeah,
Sorry.
please.
I mean, there is cloud seeding that is occurring on a much smaller scale associated with some of our ski resorts.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, bogus. You can get pictures of bogus basins, you know, giant propane tanks and stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, and then another program that we collaborate with actually in eastern Idaho in the upper Snake region is the Let It Snow program. So they are an entity that has been operating in eastern Idaho for a number of years, and they operate some manual ground-based generators. So
what's a manual boundary?
Manual. So our ground-based generators are run remotely from Boise based on weather conditions, and then the manual program is literally just that. They're manual ground-based generators.
So people have to travel to them and like flip a
Correct.
switch. Gotcha. So, but they're all based on cloud seeding at high altitudes to enhance winter storms.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay. At the beginning, when we were talking about the bill, you did mention that liability was part of the bill, but predominantly the bill was the state of Idaho giving power to the water board to initiate these programs, to accept applications, to work with companies and you know, make it safe, go through the application, the whole thing. But liability was part of that, or at least removing liability from the company that applies and then initiates this program. Like, what is that? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, I think that the liability was certainly a component that was included in the House bill. As far as, you know, what Idaho Power goes through in initiating not only the collaborative program under the House bill, but also the program in the Payette Basin, was a full description on how the program would be operated, the type of equipment that would be operated, where equipment was located, and how we would act throughout the season. And that includes, again, that suspension criteria. So as long as the company operates that program in a manner that was reflected to the Water Resource Board in their approval process, then we're operating the program under the description given to the board, and that liability component comes into play at that point. So the program is very specifically lined out and described within the details provided to the Water Resource Board, and that's how we operate.
Okay. So bottom line is the Water Resource Board is given the power to initiate these programs. And the Water Resource Board is the one that approves the applications to operate in a certain manner. So Idaho Power goes to them and says, hey, we would like to use silver iodide at these quantities to produce this precipitation within a range, like all of these different things. And the Water Resource Board says, yes, you may do that. And then Idaho Power goes out and does exactly that. And it operates within those ranges, and it uses exact chemicals and compounds that they were talking about, the whole bit.
Absolutely. And we do work closely with the Water Resource Board with any changes to the program. And then there's some reporting after the fact as well. So as part of our agreement with the board and their staff, we report on the previous season's program. So there's a lot of collaboration going on back and forth between Idaho Power and the Water Resource Board and their staff.
Gotcha.
Again, we collaborate closely with them, and we also work as Idaho Power and as collaborators with the board with other entities. Again, I mentioned NCAR being one, and universities outside of the University of Colorado as well. So there's a lot of collaboration within the cloud seeding community that we certainly take advantage of and learn from.
Gotcha. We've talked about a lot of different things. Have we, I mean, I'm sure we've missed things, but have we missed anything that you wanna touch on at the end here?
Yeah, I think, again, just going back to the value that cloud seeding brings to a myriad of benefits as far as increased water supply throughout the state. So, we not only, we mentioned working with the Idaho Water Resource Board, but we also collaborate with several water districts that participate in the cloud seeding program as well. So within, again, the Boise and the Wood and the Upper Snake. So there's just a number of benefits from the program as a water management tool. And so it's a program that's developed over almost more than 30 years as far as Idaho Power's involvement in the state of Idaho, and was even operated before we started within the state in various basins within the Snake River in southern Idaho. So it has a long standing within the state, and it's just a good program that benefits not only our customers as far as increased hydropower production, and that directly impacts what our customers pay for power, but it also benefits other water users, including irrigators and recreationists. So.
Right, the agriculture.
Absolutely.
That's one of the, I mean, obviously we had this horrendous issue with turning off pumps because of the aquifer. And it's again, 75,000 acre feet of water was really the deciding factor, which is one of the 7 canals was going to be short this amount of money. And you guys are theoretically generating a million extra acre feet of water. I mean, that's a profound increase. Well,
correct.
Kresta, thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I really appreciate this information. And again, NCAR, what does that stand for? Atmospheric Research National Center. There it is. National Center for Atmospheric. Yeah. National Center for Atmospheric Research. You could add University of Colorado at Boulder.
Correct.
They do that there. The Snowy program. That again, a lot of different resources people can check out. And of course, we have the Water Resource Board. Resource Board. They're the ones that are accepting and reviewing applications and monitoring these things. That's another resource for people to check out.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming in today. I really appreciate you.
Thanks.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.